Hello and welcome to Absolute Trust Talk. I am Kirsten Howe. I'm the host today. And today we are going to be talking about divorce, just certain aspects of divorce. Now, most people who live in California are aware that California is a community property state. And what that means, among other things, is that on divorce, the community property gets divided approximately 50-50, which is very easy to implement if all you have is cash in a bank account. That's simple. But most couples' financial situations are more complex financially than that. And dividing everything into two shares is also complicated. So, for example, you can't really divide the family residence into two equal shares. Or, you could, but nobody would want to live in either side. So the finances have to be kind of examined a little more closely. And also, equal value isn't necessarily equal. Some assets produce income and others don't. And some assets carry a tax burden and others don't. So how does a couple arrive at an equitable division of the assets that takes all of this complexity into account? Well, the answer is to consult with a certified divorce financial analyst like my guest, Glenn Bittner. Glenn is a financial advisor with Pacific Wealth Planning. He, as a financial advisor, recognizes that money is more than just math. And he understands that everybody's views about money are their own, they're unique. And even people in very similar financial situations might have a completely different approach to their finances and different financial goals. So he really strives to learn as much as he can about his clients. Working closely and asking the right questions is integral to how he works with his clients. And during his time in the industry, he has specialized in financial planning for both businesses and individuals. And now he is a certified divorce financial analyst, and we're going to talk about that. Now, when he's not working, he likes to play golf. But of course, as most parents, his main passion is spending time with his 3 kids. And he enjoys volunteering for their sports teams and leagues. If you have kids, it means a lot of meets, a lot of games, a lot of tournaments. He's currently the treasurer of the Walnut Creek Swim Conference and conference representative for the Red Gear Rats swim team, which is not easy to say, but I did it. Glenn, thanks so much for being here. Welcome. It's just my pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Kirsten. I really appreciate you having me on. And Red Gear Rats is not the easiest thing to say, especially, over and over again. So you did a great job with that. I appreciate it.
When you're sitting in the stands, go
yeah,
team, go.
It's not the best mascot, but it's a great team. So we'll deal with that.
I guess I didn't focus on that word rats, but I'm sure you have fun with it. Okay, so as I mentioned, you are a financial advisor, but also have a certification that not all financial advisors have, and that is the Certified Divorce Financial Analyst, or CDFA. Everything has to be an acronym. Tell us, what is a CDFA?
It's a financial advisor who has been trained to look at divorce from a financial side. So the assets, like we talked about, you covered a lot of what a CDFA is in your introduction. So I appreciate that a lot. Really, Investopedia has a definition that a certified divorce financial analyst helps couples and their attorneys achieve equitable divorce settlements using tax law, asset distribution, and short and long-term financial planning. And I think, that kind of really covers it in a nutshell. We kind of look at all the things around the financial side of divorce and really help to make sure that both parties get the equitable distribution that they deserve, and we can get them through the process as fast as possible.
Okay. And so, divorce, we all understand this. Divorce is a legal matter. often with significant financial elements. And your contribution, as you just said, to the divorce process is to help clients achieve a good financial result, which you can do largely because you have such a deep knowledge of the assets that they might have, what they are, how they work, what might happen to them in the future. You can model things out for people. So, with your deep understanding of various assets, tell us about your approach to QDROs. And before you do that, tell my audience, what is a QDRO?
So simply, a QDRO is the instrument we use to divide retirement assets. And so there's a couple different classes of assets. Retirement assets are those that are 401ks. Think of your 403bs, your 457s, pensions, those kind of things. They fall under ERISA, and I won't bore everyone with the long definition of what that is because we could be here forever and no one needs to hear that. But basically, in California, as you said, it's a community property state. The problem is these accounts for the IRS and ERISA are individual accounts. So
they're accounts in the name of the employee.
Correct.
Who earned those accounts through their work. Yeah.
Correct. And so for a non-earning spouse to be able to take some of the assets from those accounts, especially during a divorce, we need to use a QDRO. That is the legal document that allows those plans to separate out some of the assets into the non-earning spouse's name. Basically.
Okay. And I probably can't give you all the letters of the acronym, but I know the last one is order.
Right.
QDRO, order. So it's got to be submitted to a judge, and that's why we're allowed to do it.
Correct. It's a qualified domestic order, relations order. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So, which this basically means, and the Q part for qualified actually doesn't happen until the plan administrator accepts the QDRO. And so we can get into some of the things why QDROs can be used, and then maybe why we shouldn't use them or try to avoid them as much as possible.
Okay. Well, so you mentioned that these particular types of assets are subject to ERISA, which is federal scheme dealing with employee benefits, basically. And that covers all the things in the fours, the 457, the 403, 401k. Does a QDRO get used for an IRA?
No.
Okay.
And unfortunately, I've seen situations where lawyers require QDROs for IRAs, but they do not. That is not something that is necessary, and usually adds time and expense to the process. QDROs can run anywhere from $800 to $1,200. Lawyers, after the divorce is done, they don't help do the QDRO process. That is usually left up to the individual. And where we see a lot of trouble with that is it's a timely thing that needs to be done in a certain time frame. So if you get a QDRO through the divorce process and say you put it on a back burner because you're dealing with all the other emotional stuff and all the things that we know happen, and 2 or 3 years later, you go back to that QDRO, it's not enforceable anymore. And so now you have to go back and reopen the whole process, rewrite one. It becomes a nightmare.
Okay. Okay. So the lawyer gets the QDRO for the client, and the client has to go to the plan administrator and implement. Okay.
I would say one of the other big issues is, and especially on the pension side, each pension plan is controlled by its own plan documents. And so all pensions are different. So you might want to split up an asset in a divorce case that your lawyer has done for someone else. And then you write the QDRO and you go to the plan administrator and they're like, we don't accept this. Our plan cannot be divided this way. So we really want to get into that process early. One of the things we do, if we think a QDRO is coming, we reach out to the plan ahead of time. We find out what their rules are. They sometimes have wording that they need to be in the QDRO. And so we kind of start that process early instead of later, help our clients if necessary.
Okay. That's a really important point, is that these are retirement plans that are set up through the employer, and every plan is different, and it has documentation that says what you can and can't do.
Right.
And you've got to look at that documentation and know, why go get a QDRO when it's never going to be accepted.
Correct.
Okay. That's See, I'm learning stuff here too. I hope the audience can appreciate that. This is great. Okay. So you want to, I think you have said this today, but I know you've said it to me previously in preparation for today. We actually do prepare. You want to minimize the use of QDROs if you can. Why is that?
Like I said, so the time, the expense, the having to administer it after, and this isn't something people normally do every day. You don't reach out to retirement plan administrators and speak their language and work with them. So that's a whole nother world. So what we can do, sometimes we can exchange the 401k account for a like kind asset, maybe an IRA account that doesn't have all these restrictions on dividing it. And so if we can exchange accounts that have the same tax treatment for each other and eliminate the QDRO, well, we've saved our client money, we've saved them time, we've got them through the process faster, which is ultimately our goal as CDFAs, is to help our clients get through as soon as possible with the most equitable settlement and paying the least amount in legal fees. So
right.
QDROs definitely get in the way of that overriding goal that we have with our clients.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So an IRA and a 401k are in many ways equivalent. And if you can offset one with the other and thereby avoid a QDRO, that's great. That's great. Okay.
Sure.
I know that, excuse me, I know that another asset that oftentimes plays a very big role in the divorce process is the personal residence, the family home. And that can have an emotional component that isn't necessarily attached to most other assets. You want to talk about that a little bit, what you see?
Yeah, we see that a lot. Emotions are tied up in our home. It's our home. As a kid, we grow up, our home is our world. So that happens to us as adults as we go through time. And a lot of the times we see, you raise your family in your home. There's an attachment to that. You host holidays, parties at your home, Thanksgiving, Christmas. You have friends over, you build community in your home with your neighbors. Some of us that are do-it-yourselfers, you've remodeled your home yourself. Like you've literally spent some sweat and blood to put a new bathroom in your house.
Right.
Yeah.
That's my bathroom, dang it.
So unfortunately, a lot of people in a divorce process see keeping the house as a win, where it might not necessarily be as we go forward in our new lives, and especially financially forward in our new lives. There's a lot of things around that we do try to help our clients kind of understand.
Right. So an emotional win might be a financial loss, or, it might not be the big win that you think it is financially.
Yeah.
Definitely. Okay. And I think that just you as a financial advisor in general, but in particular in the divorce setting, helping your clients focus on the rational as opposed to the emotional. I won't say irrational, but emotional. That adds a lot of value. Your ability to talk them down off the ledge or whatever it is, but to just say, let's look at the numbers and not be so emotional about it.
Right. Definitely.
Okay. So what are some of the things that have to be considered when you're trying to figure out how to allocate the home?
Yeah, that's a great. This is one of the biggest points. So I appreciate you asking questions about this for sure. Really, one of them is just understanding that the long-term reality of keeping the home. Can you afford it? And some people looking at their settlement agreement, or when they're trying to come up with the settlement agreement, say, oh, I can trade this asset for the home, maybe trade a stock account for the house, but really try to make people understand or help them understand the different tax ramifications of each thing. And like you said, the emotions are a big part of it. I also try to help people understand that maybe there's feelings tied up in the home that you're not going to want to revisit 2 or 3 years down the line. I know for me, when I talked about the remodeling project, I remodeled my bathroom. I specifically put in a 2-person shower for me and my wife. We did separate. She left a couple years later. I'm in the shower one day. I'm like, oh, that's why I built this like this. And you still get drawn back to a time that you
Oh,
have hopefully left and moved forward from at some point, so you can go on to life 2.0.
yeah.
And so, I use that story a lot with my clients to kind of just, put out the idea of different things and how they can affect you staying in a house. And some of the other pieces really on the financial side are, can you get a mortgage on the house? We've had a client who got awarded the house in a divorce decree and then went out to get a loan to pay off, to pay off the ex-spouse and couldn't qualify for the loan. And so obviously there wasn't a lot of planning in that case. But we also, do you have the income to keep the house going forward? And without just tying it, if all your income goes to keeping that house, well, you're not going to live a great life. You're not going to go to dinner, travel, that kind of stuff. And I think that the kind of all this leads to what we see a lot is usually a lot of times the people who keep the house 2 or 3 years down the line decide they want to sell the house.
Oh,
Well, that gets into the tax burden of if you sell it originally, well, then you have two people and splitting the capital gains, the $500,000 exemption you get on capital gains for two people living in a house. Once that ex-spouse is out of the property and it's 100% yours, now 2 or 3 years later, you have the whole capital gain yourself, and you only have the $250,000 exemption. So
right.
keeping a home that you don't end up living in for a long time is buying a tax burden, basically.
Yeah, and it's just a straight financial burden. I mean, a home is not an income producing asset, it's an income sucking asset.
Repairs.
There's property taxes, there's insurance, there's upkeep, all of that, and all of that's part of what you have to consider. But let me back you up to the thing about the capital gains. I think there's some more nuance there that you and I were talking about earlier. And also, as it turns out, last night I was talking about this with someone in my book group. Not that that matters, but it's, it's a thing that's out there and people need to know about it.
Yeah, and you're right. So like the scenario I just laid out about you keep the house and you sell it 2 or 3 years later and you get the whole capital gains. There is one caveat to that. We see this mostly with maybe kids who are in high school and the parents are separating, but they want to keep the kids in the same school district till they finish high school.
Just one more year. Yeah.
Or even 2 or 3 more years. It can be a handful of years. But if part of the divorce decree is one person gets to stay in the house with the kids, the other party is allowed to, for the IRS, still be part of the house. So they still hold on to their capital gains exemption of $250,000, even though they're not technically in the house, because the separation of the house, it's still held in both of their names, but one person's not living there. But because of the divorce decree, it circumnavigates the IRS rule of the $250,000. And there's actually one more piece of that where it could even be possible if the spouse that stays in the house gets remarried and the new husband or wife spends at least 2 years in the house, that couple gets $500,000 off the eventual sale. And the ex-spouse, who still is on paper part of the house, still gets his $250,000. So there could be, if you marry or divorce timely, there could be an even extra capital gain. But we don't see that very often. It's more of a theoretical thing than I've actually ever seen happen in real life. But it's a possibility.
Okay, but so that's something that actually needs to be written in the order.
Correct.
In order for that to happen. Well, okay, so I'm going to ask what to me is the obvious follow-up question. If both spouses remarry, can each side get 500? Can you get $1 million out of that deal?
And no, because the spouse that's not in the house, the person they remarried has no, they're not living in the house. They're not using it as their main residence for 2 out of the 5 years, which is the IRS rule. So
that's okay. I forgot about that 2 out of 5 years deal.
And there actually is some other little nuances about that the outside spouse doesn't even have to have been in the house for the 2 years. They're considered being there if the spouse that keeps the house is there. So, but I think you made a very important point. All these things I talk about have to be written into the divorce decree for them to happen. They can't just happen on the outside. It has to be an order signed by the judge that allows the special IRS treatment. Okay.
Yeah. So these are important things people need to know. There's a lot that has to be looked at.
There is a lot.
Yeah. It's not just how much is this worth, but okay, what is the tax consequence of of this down the road. Okay, now I also think that we did talk about QDROs, and there's some special maybe exceptions to the tax rules or provisions in the tax code for taking distributions from retirement plans in connection with a divorce. And I'm probably phrasing that question in a way that makes you go, I think I know what you're talking about.
I actually do. I do
So
know.
bail me out here.
And so, like I said in the beginning, we want to try to avoid QDROs as much as possible.
Right.
There is one scenario where we can use it as a tool in our toolbox to help the non-earning spouse in a specific situation where maybe one party has done most of the working, the other one has stayed at home. So one has most of the assets in their name, and there's really not a lot of other assets to divide up in the beginning process.
Right.
Through a QDRO, if you split a 401k account or the other 4 accounts, like you called it, any of the 4s,
Yeah.
if during that process the non-earning spouse takes out cash, they're not subject to that 10% early withdrawal penalty if they're under 59 and a half. So if they do need some cash to live on in the beginning, they can pull money out of a retirement account without the 10% penalty. They do still have to pay as ordinary. They still have to take it as ordinary income tax on their tax return, but they eliminate the 10% penalty. So that's one thing I didn't even know until I started the program. And so the things that those little things, but they can be really helpful in certain situations for certain clients.
Yeah. Because that's not at all unusual for clients to have a house, a 401k, and a couple of bank accounts. And how do you divide that? How do you live off of that? So I didn't know that. Well, but let me ask you this question. Is there any cap on that? Or as long as you're willing to pay the income tax, you can take out as much as you want?
Yeah, pretty much, half the account's yours. You can take out as much as you want, but you have to pay the income tax on it.
Okay.
And then and then obviously you don't have that money growing for later on in life. So there is a balance of how much do you take now versus how much do you save for your future. But
okay. That is a very important thing to know. Okay. But we've been talking about the 4s and we talked a little bit about IRAs, but pension plans are a little different from those things. And talk about a pension. Like I always use the phrase a true pension because clients will use that word and it means different things to different people. But I'm talking about a true pension where somebody upon retirement is going to get X dollars a month for the rest of their life.
Right. And so, we'll take a look at that, try to understand the plan documents up front, see what can be done with it. And then really the decision is, do we trade some future income for some assets now? So we kind of look at it for our client. It might be worth because, what happens if the person who has the pension passes away? What happens if they get remarried? There's a lot of things that can happen along the way that could maybe cause the dollars you think you're going to get in the future not to be what you thought today. I don't know if that got a little bit convoluted, but basically you're expecting the X to get $5,000 a month at age 65. So you think $2,500 a month is yours. Things could happen along the way where you don't actually get the whole $2,500. So looking at the overall financial picture, sometimes it's better to trade those future pension assets for some other kind of asset today that has the same tax valuation. So we can use it as maybe a bartering tool, or, it might make sense for them to split the payments later. But then that's where you come into maybe you have to get a life insurance policy to protect the life of that person, to make sure they get their pension dollars or other pieces like that. But it's definitely a good tool we use. It can be, like I said, traded for another asset, which we do a lot of, to make people equitable. And so I think the easiest thing or the easiest way to look at it is it's kind of it is a complicated asset. So making sure you understand the whole thing and how it best helps you going forward and for the rest of your life. That's a lot of what we some of the main areas we work with clients for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at, there's a lot of analysis that has to go into when you're talking about a future asset and what its worth is today.
And luckily for me, I was a math major. I started out to be a math major. So doing net present value calculations and future value calculations, I like my financial calculator, 12B1C. I like to pull that out whenever I can. So I am made for this job on that side. But yes, you're correct. A lot of those calculations have to go into valuing the pension today and in the future.
Right. And making assumptions and running it this way, running it that way, based on the various assumptions, like assuming we retire and we live for 20 years, assuming we retire and live for 30. Yeah. Okay. That's it's so complicated. There's so many little nuances to all of this stuff.
We had a client who hired us, and she told us that her ex had to take his pension as a lump sum, and they were going to use it to pay off the house so she could stay there. He had $1.8 million lump sum pension. She could not get, and unfortunately didn't understand the whole process, didn't realize that if they had took it out as a lump sum, half, 900,000 of that was going to pay taxes. They were only going to be left with, half of it. And that's not a good financial move. If that is one of your biggest retirement income sources, to give it half to the IRS and use it all to pay off the house. So those are the kind of things that people kind of think they might want to do. And then we have to try to help them, understand it makes sense from one side of it, but it does not make sense financially for the rest of your life.
Well, and so were you able to come up with another alternative solution that was better for them? I mean, I'm sure you were able to do that.
Yeah, but
did they accept it?
Client, and this is the thing we say all the time, you can do whatever you want to, but just our job is to help you understand the ramifications. But this particular person ended up not hiring us and went a different direction. So I don't know how
you don't know the outcome. Yeah. Okay. It's a good story though. Yeah. Okay. So now you come up with this solution, a proposed solution. We're going to, here's a way that we might divide it. I'm assuming that you have to also make sure that it's going to work over the long term. It might, the math works equal, but you want it to work over the long term for these people, right?
Right. And so, what we do a lot of is basic financial planning. We run a cash flow statement for them and show income expenses with these assets growing off into the future at a reasonable rate, and how that will play out for the rest of your time. We're emotionally invested in our clients being taken care of financially for the rest of their life, if we can get them there. Now, sometimes part of that is maybe they're going to have to get a job, but letting them understand what the ramifications of the divorce settlement are before they actually sign on the dotted line is really beneficial to them, so that they know what they're agreeing to. There's a lot of gray divorce, silver divorce these days with seniors where they need, that there's not really any time to get a job, so they need to make sure that they're going to be financially okay forever in their divorce settlement. Where if you're a little bit younger, the court at some point wants you to be financially independent as well. So, those days of spousal support going on forever, at least in California, that's not really the norm anymore.
It doesn't really happen very often.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
okay. I think I saw a question in here. I'm turning to our audience questions. And let me scroll all the way and make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay. So here's one. Okay. We've been talking about various assets and how it's really important to understand the asset. So a lot of our clients nowadays have, incentive employment assets like stock options, RSUs. And so this listener is asking, how does that play out?
And kind of like the pension, there are different programs, different companies. So, and those are some of the assets that might not be able to be divided equally. Like you mentioned in the beginning, some assets can, and those were the ones I was thinking of when I heard you talk about that. So RSUs that are granted and vest during the marriage, there's something called a Nelson formula. And so we run calculations, and it is a black and white formula. So there is no gray area. You get a certain percentage depending on how long you've been there working, how long the marriage was, when the asset was granted, when it vested. Now, some of the other stock options, like you said.
Let me interrupt you though. I made the mistake of calling it an RSU, and then you called it an RSU, but I can't assume our listeners know what that means.
Oh.
So a restricted stock unit.
Correct.
Okay.
And then basically stocks that a company will give to an employee that they can't take ownership of right away, or they can't sell right away. They're given them, but they don't earn them or vest into them until a future date. It's kind of like a way to keep employees at the company. We used to call it golden handcuffs when it was done with life insurance way back in the day, but now it's RSUs.
Right.
We always have to have better terminology.
Yeah. So if it's already vested, then it's just stock and the couple can divide it. But if it hasn't yet vested, the other spouse has, a community property right to some of that. And you're talking about how do we figure out what is their share?
Correct. And there is a formula the courts use. And we run those calculations all the time for individuals and for attorneys. Sometimes attorneys would rather farm out that piece of the work to us. And so,
They've got law stuff to do.
And some of those aren't dividable as well. Like there are some RSUs or things that companies give to their employees for staying on way in the future. Well, those aren't part of the community property. They're more part of the employee themselves. So some of those can't be divided. Some of them are held in what we call constructive receipt or constructive trust, which they can't be divided until they come out of that. So again, kind of like the pension, there's a lot of different rules and considerations when dividing that asset class during a marriage. So that you really want to make sure you work with someone who understands that.
You have to understand that plan and that particular asset that company issued to its employee. Okay. And so the listener was asking about RSUs and also mentioned stock options. I'm guessing it's similar.
Yeah, very similar.
Okay.
So RSUs are usually things that are given to the employee, and stock options are things you can purchase. You have the right to purchase a share of the company. It may usually a little less value than current price,
right?
That kind of stuff. So, and then like we have talked about a lot, the tax treatment of all these things. You can imagine if you buy a stock at a lower price, there's a capital gain. If you get given a stock at a lower price, there's a capital gain. So we really, really want to be careful about all those things.
Great. All right. I'm going to scroll through my listener comments just to make sure I didn't miss any questions down at the bottom. There are some new ones. Okay. I think we got all the questions. If I missed one, I'm sorry to you listeners out there. Glenn, this has been very educational for me. I'm sure for my listeners. I consider myself a somewhat informed person about all of these things. I learned a lot. Thank you.
I appreciate it. It's definitely there's a lot of nuances to these topics. So I appreciate that.
Very much so.
Help educate people.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. My guest today has been Glenn Bittner, a certified divorce financial analyst, and he has really enlightened us on some of these issues. Thank you so much. Okay. And thank you all for listening. We always enjoy entertaining and educating you a little bit. And I look forward to connecting with you next time.
Thank you for joining us today for another episode of Absolute Trust Talk Live. If you enjoyed listening in, then don't forget to subscribe. You can find us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you may listen by searching Absolute Trust Talk. While you're there, we would also love for you to leave us a review. And then why not share your favorite episodes with family, friends, or colleagues too? You can find all of our shows and corresponding show notes by visiting absolutetrustcouncil.com. You'll also find a variety of other free resources, including our ebooks, videos, blogs, presentations, and more. If you need help with your estate planning or administration, we also offer a free discovery call to help get the process started. You can find more information on booking your session by visiting absolutetrustcouncil.com/scheduling. Don't forget to keep an eye out for our next live episode in 2 weeks. If you join us for the broadcast, you can submit questions during the show. But if not, don't worry. You can always get in touch with us by sending a quick message to info@absolutetrustcouncil.com. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you soon.